So, coming back to you live from Syracuse Collectors Con, we now have special guest to the pod, Jeff Watkins from Funky Town Comics and Vinyl. How are we doing, Jeff?
Happy to be here. Doing great. How are you?
We're doing pretty solid. It's funny. Every time we're recording and like somebody walks over, I'm like almost trying to turn it on, and I'm like, "Hi! Oh wait, we're actually recording something. I can't talk to the people at the booth." But yeah, it's been pretty good for us. Like a lot of interaction. I know Mike's doing good with his comic stuff, and
Nice.
I think you guys are seeing a pretty good showing over there as well.
Yeah, it's always conventions I find fascinating because I wear a lot of hats at conventions.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'm a retailer, like today.
Right.
Sometimes I'm panel hosting, also like today. Sometimes I'm organizing. Sometimes I just want to be like the inner kid who's so excited at seeing like a TMNT reunion, at seeing like the wrestlers, at hosting. Like, so I'm enjoying all of them.
Right.
But it's like going through the stages of grief. I'm like, I'm excited. I'm an organizer. I'm hosting panels. I'm a kid.
Yep.
I'm a fan. I'm a friend.
Yep.
So but all in all, having a fantastic time.
Nice. Yeah, I'm glad it's been solid. They and I think I don't want to speak for Lynn, who's organizing the whole thing, but we've had a hell of a turnout here. Like this has been way more than I expected.
I'm going to say this about our city. Like, it's a passionate town.
Yeah.
This is a tough town.
Yep.
And this is a town that sees, to the uninitiated, we have on average like less than 15 beautiful sunny days a year here.
Right. Yep.
And we're a city that's rising above economically. But what's wild is you're seeing all these facets of fandom from locals here who are real fans. You're
Right.
seeing people, the voice actor panel. It's so funny hearing someone from like Sonic and someone from Skyrim and like Courage the
Yep.
Cowardly Dog all interacting, and you're seeing like, especially kids with like sensory issues who really enjoy voice actors. Like, people are having a good time here, and there's a bunch of people I want to say hi to. I got to say hi to Steve Orlando like intermittently, but I mean,
Yep.
This is someone who writes Scarlet Witch, who writes X-Men,
Right.
who writes Justice League.
Yeah.
So I'm still, even though I'm still just in disbelief at the coolness of all this.
Oh yeah. I mean, and you've been in the industry for years at this point, and still like there's that little bit of kid in a candy store when someone like Orlando walks up and you're like, I read your stuff. I know who you are, and you're local. Like
I never stopped being that person who. I remember like doing a convention that I organized a long time ago, and wildly, I got to pick up Barb Wolfman at the airport, and I working in the music industry with like names like 50 Cent or The Roots or like My Chemical Romance, like fun.
yeah.
But when I had to pick up Barb Wolfman at the airport, I was reduced to being like an actual kid.
What am I doing? Like, is this real? Like,
Exactly.
this guy who had so much influence on everything that shaped you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like meeting like Herb Trimpe. I was at a convention, and I got to meet Herb, and it was the end of the show.
Yep.
And we were cleaning up and organizing. And if you haven't been to a convention before, wear good shoes.
Uh-huh.
You're on concrete floors for a long time. You're hungry.
Yes.
You're tired. You've walked the equivalent of several miles, and you've interacted with so many people, so your social battery is a little worn down, right?
Yep.
And at the end of that show, I got to say, thank you, Herb, not only for Wolverine, but Shogun Warrior, G.I. Joe.
Right.
Like, you were an architect of my fandom from childhood on. We had a great conversation, and he left. And when I got home a few hours later, I read that he passed away within hours of that conversation.
Oh, wow.
It was one of the last conversations
It's crazy.
ever had, right? And it still to this day kind of blows my mind because, sure, I was at this convention as a retailer, as someone who was like a label witness for signatures.
Yep.
I was there in an official capacity. But when I got to meet him and speak with him, I was still the same kid who was like delivering newspapers and shoveling driveways to be able to buy that comic. And I think that's the fun of events like this.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, it doesn't matter how old you are on the outside.
Yep. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I mean, like this con, me walking around and seeing the original cast of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990, which is like one of those movies that was on repeat as a kid for me, is just like, oh, okay, these are the people that were inside the suits that shaped my nerddom.
Yeah.
And like shaped where we are.
It is wild. It's nuts to look at like the section where the Turtles guests are signing.
Yeah.
Like, man, that's April O'Neil.
Yeah, exactly.
That's April O'Neil right there.
Yep.
You know, Axe and Smash Demolition from the WWE.
Right. Yeah, that's what...
It's like, damn, that's Demolition.
Yep.
You know, it's still, and I've been doing these conventions since the 90s. And
yep.
you would think I've grown sick of them. You would think I wouldn't light up like a kid every time. But
right.
It's just so fun to like hold on to that. It's just so fun to never let it go. And you know what I'm meeting today is a lot of ambassadors, people who are good at being an ambassador for what they collect,
right,
and making it fun. This should be fun, right?
Oh, 100%.
You've heard me say it, like let driving suck, let work suck, like
yep.
let everything else be hard. Like I need a haircut. Let waiting for a haircut a long time. Let that suck.
Well, waiting for a haircut, you can just walk downstairs to Funky Town Comics and Vinyl.
But like, let this be fun. Let comics and toys be awesome. And I see a lot of people with like their phones out and acting like it's Wall Street, and it's like, no, like, enjoy this because this is fun and this is historical and this is something that's been around long before us. And if we do our jobs right, because we are the key holders, not gatekeepers, we're key holding it for the next generation. Because if comics and this fandom dies on our watch,
right,
I don't want to go to my grave with that. And so even the story behind this event, how like stores that normally don't work together are working together,
right,
and people
to keep things moving around here and keep it fresh.
Because at the end of the day, ego doesn't mean anything.
Oh yeah,
what means something is that we're able to give this to our kids, right?
Yeah, and that's I can attest to the fact of how many kids we've had come through here, which is it's great to see like the multi-generational. We've seen like grandfathers with fathers and daughters and grandkids that are just like walking around every generation like a kid in a candy store for a different reason. We talked about like we've got a bunch of questions out here. Mike and I put together about like who's your favorite Batman, who's your favorite Spider-Man, are you more excited for Superman or Fantastic Four, that sort of thing. What's your favorite Star Wars droid? And it's hilarious to look at like not pigeonholing demographics or anything, but like just the breadth of answers based on, you know, the Batman question. It's like younger kids, you get a lot of Christian Bale. And by younger kids, I mean I'm 40, so people younger than me.
But not Michael Keaton and Adam West.
Right. But then like we had one of the elder gentlemen that came by was like, oh, Adam West in a heartbeat just because he was my first.
Adam West.
And then Keaton, like then overall it's been Keaton versus Conroy. Because like I know Mike and I are both 90s kids, and it's like when I read Batman, you read Kevin Conroy's voice.
And it's for a generation, and I mean a generation.
Yeah. For
an entire generation, Batman the Animated Series was getting off your school bus and running home to make sure you didn't miss a minute of that show.
And that was X-Men for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we've had that talk before about how like 90s kids, it was X-Men. Like you were either X-Men or Batman, and you always watched the other, but it was like you had one hardcore.
One was your favorite. And I talked to this recently with Jesse, my partner at Funky Town. His theory, and I think this holds a lot of water. His theory is that when you're in your formative years, the character that you grew up with, or the movie or album that you loved then, is your favorite. We have we have these discussions all the time, so we're always talking about like what decade was the best decade for movies. And, we go back. Was it the 70s with all of its like pioneership with Jaws and Texas Chainsaw and so many, The Godfather,
Star Wars,
or was it the 80s because the VHS era? It means so much to so many people, myself included. Like going to rent a video.
Right.
It was like it was a rite of passage. It was a very timeless thing to rent a video. But then you get in the 90s. There was a point in the 90s where you could walk into a movie theater and the marquee said Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump, Shawshank Redemption. Like those were your choices, right?
That's insane.
And we've had periods of that in comics. Like in the 70s, DC was about to go under, and Jeanette Kahn reverses course and brings on Alan Moore and David Gibbons to do Watchmen, brings on Neil Gaiman to create Sandman, brings in Frank Miller to do Dark Knight Returns. And so we've seen these like eras in comics. And I guess I'm often asked, like, what's my favorite collect? Like, what's the thing I collect the most? And I'm like, mention the next thing. Yeah. The next thing I collect, right? Because we've all been there where it's like, I just need issue 5 and I finish this set. And you work and you work and you work and you get issue 5, but as soon as you put it in the bag and board.
So I just did that. I know you guys, like I've talked to you guys about like the Remender Uncanny X-Force
Of
#1.
course, yeah.
And I was out in Denver for work, and I swung by Mile High, they had a 60% off sale, and I got that book at 60% off, and I was like, oh, okay, now what? Like, what's next? There's always that next.
There is that, and the Mile High Comics has always been a lot to me. The Mile High catalog, now going back to the 80s,
Oh, yeah.
I'm dating myself here, I'm showing my age, but way before the internet, when the internet was science fiction, there was like a paper catalog that would come out, and it would have the issues that were available, and like for the holidays, my parents were kind enough to let me order out of that catalog,
that's awesome.
right? And like that box would show up, and it was like, so when you say Mile High, or like even like New York Comic Con, or some of the stores, some of the conventions that have been around a long time, you know, and they hold a lot of fun memories for people.
Yeah,
like,
and they're a precursor to what we have now too. It's like, you know, New York Comic Con, people think of what it's become, not what it was, and it's like there's a balance between the two. That's like there's still a semblance of what it was and what it is, but it's, you know, so much more than that now too. So
it is. It's become, and I like something I always enjoyed about this is comics has its one foot very firmly in the past, one foot very firmly in the future, right? And comics have always been a modern day morality. It's how we convey things to ourselves. It's how we convey to each other our morality, right? Like whether it was like cave paintings or church glass like stained windows. Like we talk about how we survive and how we advance as a species through this pictorial storytelling. So I think comics are important, and it's been diluted with movies and video games and mega conventions, but the core principles are always there. And it's just like with great power comes great responsibilities, part of our American lexicon. It's part of like, and the stories are always the same, right? Like you'll always remember going to Mile High Comics, no matter what. You'll remember this trip this week for the rest of your life. You'll remember the first time you read Watchmen for the rest of your life. You'll remember your first major Comic-Con, like for the rest of your life. And these are things that we all have together. And at the core of it is this message of do right, treat each other right, accept each other, save the world, right?
Yeah, man.
And how does that not appeal to that kid inside of all of us, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's crazy to think too, like right now, if somebody asked me how to get into the medium, I wouldn't even tell them DC or Marvel or any of the big books. Like right now, the indies are just absolutely killing it. And they're, you know, there's a lot behind them. And it's almost that heart and soul of what used to be in the industry that is still there, and now finding another way to express itself with some of these independent creators.
Hasn't it always kind of been the motif? Like comics have gone through so many ups and downs. Like we went through the seduction of the innocent ages where parents were burning piles of comic books on the basis that somebody wrote a book, which by the way ended up being utterly bullshit. Right? But like at that point,
hi Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. I was one of those kids whose parents took the Dungeons and Dragons games away and like ripped up the pieces and stuff. But so comics have always kind of had to fight for our place in the world. But here's the thing. The stories have never really changed. We're talking 1938 when Superman was created. And this is a story about a planet that's environmentally destroyed. And the politicians are saying it's fine, but the scientists are saying it's not. And they put their only child on. Yeah, right? Is that something we have been experiencing for now? You know,
as a current scientist on this planet, I think I've heard this before.
Exactly. And I mean, the X-Men really are an allegory for accepting the people around you. Like you read these books and you're like, oh, if someone had blue fur, or they had a sonic voice, or you know, they disappeared and reappeared, I would have the wisdom and kindness and humanity to accept them. But then there's people walking amongst us.
There's plenty of people around here walking around with blue fur on. That people have trouble accepting, which is insane. And people forget that Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, like Professor X and Magneto, were allegories for them. So comics, it's a curse, right? It's our cross to bear that like comics are always ahead of the game when it comes to like social issues. So when I say we've got a foot in the past and in the future, like that's comics, right? Oh, absolutely.
Like, that's it. So when I see somebody here who's like elderly and they got a big smile on their face and they've got all these memories of all these classic characters, and then I see a kid who's just out of the stroller who is just lit up with excitement.
Right.
And that's it, right? Like that's the moment.
Absolutely. and that's I guess the breadth of pop culture now too. Like we've had tons of cosplay that have walked past, and I have no clue what they are. Like Mike and I have admitted, we're old people that have not as much of a pulse on the younger stuff.
You ain't getting old; they're just getting better.
Well, it is always funny too when we come down to the shop. Like, there's a distinct between Chris to you to me and Mike to Jesse. Like, there's a distinct gap in there between all of them. Like, I think you to us is like only 5 years or 7 years or something like that. But there's almost distinct eras for all this, and that this convention can speak to all of that and generations above and below.
And that was the goal. That was because at the end of the day, like there's enough division in our everyday world. You take your first step out of your car or bike or your apartment, home, whatever. When you take that first step out, you walk into a world of division, right? And it's almost like a game to see like what we don't have in common. And then you come to a Comic-Con and all of a sudden it's like, you know what? Yeah. We're under the same banner. If it's video games, if it's anime, if it's comics, if it's wrestling, like we are people that go to the store to make sure we're completing our collections, representing our fandoms, and supporting the people that we want to support. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that people from all walks of life can always find a conversation to have about Star Wars, about Batman, about Watchmen, about any of this stuff. Oh, yeah. That's the magical power of it, I think.
Well, and for anyone who this is their first con or their first anything, it's I hate to be cliche, but it's the old Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi. You've taken your first steps into a larger world.
You have. And I've seen conventions changing. Like the first convention I went to, I was 16 years old. They were calling me the kid because I couldn't drive after 9, but I was driving to Comic-Cons in like Detroit and like Toronto and setting up. And it's funny, now that I'm almost 50, I still have these guys who like raised me up in this, and they still call me the kid. I've been called the kid today, I'm almost 50. I don't get called the kid. That doesn't happen in my life. It only happens here.
Right.
And even in traveling, going to conventions out of town and meeting with people and shaking hands and seeing people that I only see in LA or Chicago. I only see them at New York. I only see them in Philly. And it just remembering them over the years. It's the gift of it. Like, something great creates something great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know which came first, like the ambassadorship or the comics, but like I couldn't live without either.
Oh yeah, no, it's a great mix. I think maybe we'll have you guys pop on again tomorrow. But I appreciate you swinging by.
I appreciate it very much. It's nice to. It's fun. This is the first time I've got to sit down with a friend and have a conversation. I'm glad it was on this one.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I know to tease for anyone listening, I know Jeff and Mike and I have talked for a good long time at this point about getting him on to talk about something that's a passion project to him, discussing the classic Watchmen. So we're going to have to make that happen at some point soon. Now it's officially recorded that we are doing this. So
I want to. Watchmen is certainly Watchmen. I remember reading Watchmen in high school. I've read Watchmen so many times over my life, and I always find something new inside it.
I feel like it probably hit you different every time you read it. If there's age gaps in there too.
It did, and I'll compare it to something else. When I was young, in my 20s, I loved The Sopranos. It was like a show that I just really enjoyed. I watched every episode on Sunday night as soon as it premiered. I had like viewing parties in my home. But I rewatched Sopranos recently as an adult. And I gotta say, it's a completely different show. Because when I was a kid, I was like, yeah, look at this gangster. He's so cool. He's so tough. Now I'm like, that guy's terrible. He's an awful person. He was...
And the show's about how horrible of a person he is.
Yes. And it's not that I was, a lack of knowledge back then. But like, as we get older, we see the stories evolve. And we see their evolution and our evolution. And Watchmen is a story that I think laid a foundation for a lot that has happened in comics ever since. It's caused a tumultuous relationship between Alan Moore and comics. Yep. Alan Moore, the creator of Watchmen, hates comics. Yeah. He refuses to sign them. He spits on them. He didn't want any credit for the movies. And so the saga of Watchmen, how it saved comics at the expense of Alan Moore's appreciation of comics.
Right. And Alan Moore, who notoriously has had amazing takes on all of, like, anything he's written, has been, like, his Swamp Thing run was just unreal. And, like, to see someone that was that far into the game get completely stripped of it, like, it's a tale.
It is. It's a tale stripped of it, and here's the thing. ask me in an hour if I side with Alan Moore or DC, my answer will change constantly. I'm grateful Alan Moore created these characters. I'm grateful this mythos exists. I wish there was more with it. Can I blame him for saying I'm taking my ball and going home?
Right.
Not really. Was that what I'd have done? No. Right. So the conversation about Watchmen is always evolving. And I've taught classes in universities across the country about Watchmen, and it's crazy to talk to people still who have a very evolutionary take on the book, myself included.
Crazy. So that's a little taste of what we'll be talking with Jeff about coming up here, hopefully soon. But yeah, I mean, once again, I'd like to thank Jeff and our sponsors, as always, Funky Town Comics and Vinyl. And yeah, we'll be talking to you guys more from the con as we go here.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely, man.
Super good.